G'day camper. Fridges are a waste of money. Don't get mad just yet. Wait till you hear the maths on this. So why do we still so often choose a fridge over a cooler? Well, that's what we're going to explore. I'm going to talk about how I use each of these, break down the true cost of the fridge versus the cooler, and of course dive into my favourite, some pros and cons. Now before we go on, I just want to make it clear that throughout this video I'm going to be using the word cooler to refer to this type of cooler and ice boxes as well. I know they're two slightly different things, but for the purpose of this video I'm not going to confuse it. That might be a better topic for the future, I think. Also, it might be worth noting that in Australia we rarely call these a cooler. We tend to call it by a brand name, Esky. For the cooler I've got a Coleman 44 litre hard cooler. March flies. Signed by Brendan Pang. And yes, when my cooler came home signed, I had to look up who that was too. This retails for 120 to 160 Australian dollars, depending where you buy it. This particular one is at least 13 years old. They still sell it, they've gone through a few colour changes since then, but it's the same thing. They're rated to hold ice for about 3 days, which I've found to be quite averagely accurate. I have actually managed to get 5 days out of this. Fridge is an Engel 40 litre, about 2006 model, so coming on 20 years old now. Currently not in use in a vehicle. This sits at home and right now it's full of frozen lamb. One of these will retail about $1,300 to $1,500. That's a huge price difference, so why do I have both? How I use them. Oh, these March flies. And I started my camping adventures with a cooler, this very same cooler. I was 17 years old, so I couldn't afford a fridge and everything to run it anyway. Out bush on weekends with mates, this is perfect. Once I had all the basic camping gear and a few trips under my belt, then I was looking to upgrade some things, and that's when the fridge came along. I was heading bush for longer than just weekends, and I was ready for the convenience of a fridge. But many of my mates didn't have four-wheel drives, which meant I was taking up to 4 people in my car and all their gear, and the fridge just didn't hold enough for everyone. So on the occasional trip, the cooler kept coming along. Look at that thing up there on the roof rack, big heavy windbreak. Probably the reason why this car looks like it's about to roll in this picture. Then I had to sell that car and I was back to a little Subaru wagon, and running the cooler was the only option I had. Now I've actually sold my fully camp kitted GU Patrol and back to a pretty standard Isuzu MU-X. It doesn't have any power for a fridge yet, so I find myself back to the 13-year-old cooler. So in all those years, what have I learned about cooler versus fridge? It's time for the pros and cons, starting with the cooler. The first pro for the cooler is it's so cheap to purchase. You can get cheaper than this $120 one, or you can get way pricier like Yeti $400+. That comes down to a few minor features, but most importantly, ice efficiency. You spend less, your ice won't last as long. You spend more, you'll get a bit more time out of your ice. Pro number 2 is that a cooler is virtually indestructible. You can toss this in your boat, it can get showered with salt water all day, take it on the beach, chuck it in the sand, sit on it like a camp chair. You could even roll your tinny in the surf and the cooler's going to come out just fine. You might lose your drinks and your food and a bit of dignity. This bad boy is going to go the distance. Number 3 might seem pretty obvious, it doesn't need power, but it also leads very well into my next point, is that it's very portable. There's no cables tying it into your car, you don't have to move a battery pack around or anything, drag it next to the fire. Wherever the party is, the cooler is. Number 5 is that even if you have a fridge, it's a great inexpensive second cooler option for if you're going for a bit longer and need to carry more cold stuff, or you're going with more people. Pro number 6 is that ice lasts a lot longer than you think. As I said, 3 days to be expected for this. I've had 5 days out of it. If you buy a better insulated model and you use block ice or you freeze bottles, you could get a week, maybe even 10 days out of your cooler with good ice management. And last, but probably not least, is nothing beats reaching into ice and digging out a cold drink. All right, now it's con time. Number 1, you're gonna get soggy food if you're not careful. Now, there's a few ways to prevent this. One of these is putting your food in individual small sealed containers. Or get one large container that takes up maybe half the space of your cooler and pack all your food into that, keeps the water out. Or you can do like I like to do, pop the bung and drain the melted ice once a day. Now a lot of people will tell you that you're ruining the efficiency of your cooler doing that, and they're right. It's scientifically proven that keeping the melted water in there makes your ice last longer. How much? Not enough for me to want the hassle of digging my food out of a slurry, to be honest, so I choose to drain. Con number 2 is that you really need to pay careful attention to maintaining your cooler in order to get the maximum life out of your ice. What I mean about... ants! What? Relentless. What I mean is keeping it insulated in the car, or if it's hotter in the car, drag it out of the car, put it in the shade under a tree. Make sure you're not leaving it open or opening it too often. The same applies to your fridge for efficiency, but your fridge can always cool back down. Your cooler is not going to get any cooler. The third con is the ongoing cost of ice. Now, if you freeze your own at home or freeze bottles at home and use that, it's obviously not an issue, but if you're going away for longer, you're going to need to buy ice at some point. Also, and my next con, is that adding warm food items along your adventure, like maybe you cooked up too much food at camp and you want to keep the leftovers, adding those warm things will impact the duration of your ice. You also only have one temperature, icy. And my final con is that the ice takes up half the usable space inside the cooler. So really this 44 litre cooler is only 20 litres because you want to at least half fill it with ice. Okay, now we're talking fridge pros and cons. And pro number 1, your food won't go soggy, unless you do something silly like put the meat on the top. Pro number 2 is that once you've splashed the cash, very big amount of cash, there's no more to spend. Well, not until the battery gets... we cover that later anyway. Pro number 3 is you get temperature control. Fridge or freezer or anywhere in between. Number 4, open it all you want. So if you're having a really thirsty night at camp, doesn't matter. It's going to use a bit more power from your battery trying to keep everything cooled down, but there's less urgency to conserve something like you get with ice. Which leads me to my next pro, which is less maintenance. You don't have to drain any melted water. You don't have to constantly pay attention to make sure it's in the shade. Sure, there's still some best practices you should follow to get the best out of your fridge, and we might talk about that in a future video. And your final pro is that if you're going on a big, remote adventure, a fridge is really your only option. Unless you don't mind drinking warm drinks and just eating from tins and keeping non-perishables, which, hey, that's kind of what they did in the 60s, 70s and 80s when they went camping. Maybe we just need to harden up. Okay, time for the cons. Con number 1, you're in for some serious coin, not just for the fridge, but for the whole battery system and everything to power it. We'll cover that in maths lesson shortly. Con number 2, the cooler is silent, a fridge makes noise. Con number 3 is that the very cheapest fridge you can get is about the same price as the very nicest, most efficient, top of the market cooler. And those really cheap fridges tend to be really inefficient and questionable quality. Con number 4 is that the fridge is not as portable as the cooler. They usually stay in a car, fully strapped down, plugged into a battery. There aren't many out there that will use a fridge the same way as a cooler, taking it out of the vehicle and moving it into their camp. And finally, ice in a cooler will last longer than a battery powering a fridge. What I mean by that is, let's say that time I got 5 days out of my ice in the cooler, even with the proper battery setup in a car, a battery will run a fridge for 2, maybe 3 days at most before it needs charging. And again, we'll cover all that in just a moment. Actually, let's just get onto it now. The true cost, let's talk about it. Everything you need to run a fridge versus a cooler. Here's the true cost. Okay, the scenario. You're going camping for the weekend. You plan to head out on Saturday, make camp at about midday, and stay out there until Sunday 3 p.m. So you purchase a cooler, $120. Add some ice. This could be free if you already froze some at home, but if you're buying it, $5 a bag. Yep, that's a savage hike since I last checked too. It used to be $3. But hey, you don't just buy one bag, you may as well get the 3 for $12 deal. So you're out of pocket $132 for the weekend. Now for the fridge, I'm really gonna have to try and pick some average values and run times for this weekend, or else we'll just be here all day. So let's say middle ground fridge value, $900. To run that fridge, you're gonna need a battery for the job. But can't I just run it off my accessory socket? Well, yeah, you can, but there's 2 problems. Number 1 is the accessory socket is probably switched with the key, so your key is gonna have to stay in the ignition. And number 2 is that going by my arrival and departure times, you're going to be parked up, car off for 27 hours. The average car battery might power a fridge for 12 hours, give or take a bit. and then your battery's going to be too flat to start the car. That long, slow draw is also what kills a car starter battery, so you're going to find yourself changing car batteries all the time. So for the second battery I use to power my fridge, I'm going with a lithium battery because I feel like we're at the price point now where the benefits outweigh the costs over older battery technology. For a mid-range, trusted brand battery, let's say $600. That gets you about 100 amp hours. That's the measure of how long it can power things. I'll grab a battery box so I can secure it in the cargo area, and that will also give me some power sockets to plug my fridge and other stuff into. That's another $100. Or you can grab one of those portable power packs that has all the 240 volt accessory sockets and everything on it. It's about twice the price, and that itself has a set of pros and cons that we can't really go into here. Either of these battery options should actually see the fridge powered for the whole 27 hours of the weekend and still have 20% or so energy left to spare. But now that you're done, you need a way to charge the battery, and you need a lithium capable charger. For one to charge the battery at home off the wall, it's about $150. Eventually, you'll want to spend more than 27 hours out camping, so you'll need a way to charge it. That could be a solar panel for $300, or to charge it off the car while you're driving, you need a dedicated car charger, and they're about $400. Plus $100 or so in cabling, and then the extra fee for someone to install it all if you're not doing it yourself. In total, if you're buying it all new and installing that battery system yourself, that's $2,400. The cooler, well, if you want to hang around camp a couple of more days but the ice is looking thin, you're up for $12 for another 3 bags and a bit of fuel for the run into town. If you camp one weekend in every month and you do one week trip every year, and you choose to buy ice every time instead of freezing your own, you're looking at $170 a year. So you can camp for 14.1176470588235529 years with a cooler before you're even with the cost of that fridge and battery setup, by which point that $600 battery is going to be ready for replacement anyway. That maths just doesn't add up. So why do we still do it? It's convenience. It's drier food. It's not worrying how long the ice is going to last and if it's going to make the distance. It's temperature control. It's really just all the niceties and making camping easier. And honestly, on a longer adventure, you do get sick of replenishing ice. But if you're just starting out camping or you're considering a new fridge setup, buy the cooler, do the whole ice thing, save your money for a good fridge and battery setup in the future. The cheap fridge is just going to let you down. And I think everyone has use for a good cooler, even if it's just for picnics on the weekend. Now what do you reckon? Did I nail it or did I fail it? If you've got any hot tips or cooler ones, leave them in the comments below and you might just be helping a fellow camper in the future.